I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. What is this, episode 85? Something like that?
So, somewhere in there.
We're nearing 100, Pat. We're getting really close. We're getting there together, you and I. Obviously, we are here to discuss the aftermath of UFC 195. Robbie Lawler narrowly defends his welterweight title against Carlos Condit, a decision that has been much disputed. Not the only disputed decision on that card. Pat, you and I just got done having about a 30-minute rewatch session with live discussion and arguing about the scoring of Lorenz Larkin versus Albert Tumanov. A lot of close fights, a lot of split decisions, a lot of them questionable one way or the other. We're not going to do too much talking about the scoring methods because that's not the kind of thing we tend to talk about on this show. But to kick off the episode, you wanted to say something about volume versus effect, Pat, which of course is a timeless debate, is it not?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this dispute would be clarified if people would actually go and read the most recent version of the rules out there. So I just want to read the section on effective striking, which is one of the major criteria here. So, quote, effective striking is judged by determining the impact of legal strikes landed by a contestant and the number of such legal strikes. So right there, that's saying that that how much damage, essentially, those strikes do, and they removed damage for liability reasons, and volume are your two criteria. Now, this is the key part. Heavier strikes that have a visible impact on the opponent will be given more weight than the number of strikes landed. These assessments include causing an opponent to appear stunned from a legal blow, causing the opponent to stagger, appearance of a cut or bruise from a legal strike, and causing the opponent to show pain. Cumulative impact on a fighter will also be weighed. If neither fighter shows an advantage in impact of strikes, the number of strikes will determine the most effective striker. So, simply landing more strikes does not mean that you win rounds.
But it is still a factor. This is the problem here is because, you know, we have this fight. I think most people will agree that Lawler is known to be a harder hitter, and he seemed to be landing the harder shots throughout much of this contest. When he did land, that's the problem. He didn't throw much. But simply because Carlos Condit is throwing more doesn't mean he's a runaway winner. I think I've probably brought this up on the show before, and I've probably brought it up to 1 million people on various message boards and comment sections and social media platforms. I hate fight stats, Pat. I can't stand when they are used to make an argument. I think fight statistics are very important are very useful when you are trying to maybe give a whole narrative of a fight after the fact or judge how one type of fighter usually performs. Like if you're trying to say they throw a lot of volume and here are their numbers, that's a perfectly fine way to use it. If you're trying to decide who won a fight simply by looking at numbers devoid of context, it's utterly foolish. And it always results in frustrating arguments, and it's really the worst. And I think if you're going to use fight stats, I think what you should do is TiVo the fight or DVR it in some way, and then watch it again, second by second, frame by frame, and count the clean shots yourself and determine how significant they are. I think you'll be surprised at how different that is often from the fight stats that are collected live, which, you know, obviously there's a lot of stress on people doing Fight Metric and CompuBox and things like that to have to judge not only the efficacy of a strike, but to say where it came from on the body, whether it was a jab or a right hand or where it landed on the body. There's a lot of things going on there, and you got to judge these things on the fly, and as we know, it's really hard sometimes to tell what lands cleanly, even more so if you're trying to quantify all of it. So they're often shockingly inaccurate. I think that's definitely the case in this fight. What were the numbers for Carlos Condit's third round with Robbie Lawler?
So you can't. So just kind of on that note, the stuff that the reports that are published after the fight are much more accurate than the graphics that are flashing
the live stats
than the live graphics, because somebody does go back immediately and rewatch the fight and rescore it. So what you're getting during the fight, like if your argument hinges on the stats that flash across the screen as the fifth round concludes, then that's not how that should be scored, because somebody is going to go back and redo it and recount the shots. So the third round of this fight, the final score or the final tally was 22 landed strikes for Carlos Condit and 11 for Robbie Lawler.
Okay. Which doesn't sound as bad as I thought it was. I thought it was, people were really tossing around the numbers for attempted strikes, I think.
Yeah, so Condit threw 78 strikes and Lawler threw 26.
Okay, and people were saying that as if that should win the person the round. And that's the thing is we said this before we began recording. We've been discussing this for a while so that we don't have to discuss it too much on the show. But volume, much like defense, is its own reward. We don't tell fighters, or coaches don't tell their fighters to throw volume so that the judges will say, oh, good job, you threw more punches, you win. They do it because throwing more punches means you have a higher likelihood of landing more punches. And landing punches is how you win a fight. And landing good punches is how you land a fight. Better punches than those of your opponent. So you can't simply go by the fact that one man is throwing a lot, because I think, if anything, there are a couple narratives we can take from this fight, but one of them is Robbie Lawler's defense. Very difficult to suss out while it's happening live, I think. I think on last week's show I called him the greatest slow-mo fighter of them all, and that was very true. For example, when Condit had him hurt in the fourth round, Lawler avoided pretty much every piece of damage that Condit tried to stack up on that while looking for counters himself with his back against the fence. He was hurt before that, but did a great job of weathering the storm. And I think that is a really hard thing to see live. And I include myself when I say it's hard to see, because I don't know about you, Pat, but I was geeking out during this entire fight, standing up and clapping and yelling, go Bob and things like that, and screaming and embarrassing my girlfriend. But
yeah, I was losing my damn mind.
Right. And that's, I think, what the real narrative from this fight should be, right? It's really disappointing that this happened. I come home, I'm like, man, people are going to be buzzing this crazy, awesome, close fight between two of the most violent fighters in the sport, and everyone's unhappy. That's the worst. That's not.
I mean, I think it also sucks for people in our shoes, because and I think it's almost hard for us to understand the anger over a decision like this, because conservatively, how many fights do you think we watch in a year? 600?
Yeah,
800?
Hundreds and hundreds, yeah.
Yeah, and it's not only difficult, it's downright unproductive for you or I to get really wrapped up in how many even robbery decisions. I think it's not healthy to be this focused on them. And
right.
If you're going to be a dedicated fan of mixed martial arts, you can't get up in arms about these robberies, because or about robberies, or especially about close fights where there are legitimate arguments for the fight to go either way. That's the thing that I think you have to bear in mind about this, is you can make a real argument based on the rules as I just read them to you, that Robbie Lawler should have won that third round, that Robbie Lawler should have won the fight. You can also make an argument that, well, those strikes that Lawler landed weren't actually all that impactful, and the volume should outweigh that. Mm-hmm. Those are both perfectly legitimate arguments to make.
Yeah, people have this discussion as if that's a new argument that is easy to settle. That is the argument of scoring combat sports. That is the discussion. It's the one that's been happening for centuries now, since the creation of boxing and the idea that you didn't have to be knocked out to lose or get a knockout to win. A decision is based on subjectivity, and part of the subjectivity is, did he land more, or did he land better, and or both? It's confusing, and it allows this. You have to allow subjectivity to get a decision in there, and that's why it's frustrating sometimes. Live, I thought that Lawler won. On a rewatch, I think I probably would give that third round to Condit, but I'm still not upset that it went to Lawler. It was close.
Yeah. And you, on some level, if you're going to be a long-term fan of combat sports, you need to get used to the idea that close fights are close and could go either way.
Yeah.
You have to stop crying robbery every time a decision happens, because it devalues the term. And there are going to be real robberies. There are going to be terrible, terrible decisions that happen. And when those go down, you need to have the semantic value of robbery be what it is. You cannot devalue the term by applying it to every close fight. Because, like, if Lawler Condit is a, quote, robbery, according to you, then what was Sanchez Pearson? Like,
right.
Or, you know, I didn't necessarily think so at the time. I think so now. What was Iaquinta Masvidal? Like, you need, if you're going to talk about real robberies, or, you know, one that nobody remembers now, but what was a real robbery at the time, Kiriaso Mitsugaki. That was a fucking robbery.
Sure.
Like, these are, like, you have to reserve the term for things that really deserve it. Like,
for boxing fans, do you remember Jose Benavidez Jr. versus Mauricio Herrera? Have you seen that one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
God, what a robbery.
Those are robberies, man.
Horrible robbery, yeah.
Robbie Lawler versus Carlos Condit, this is a window onto the problems of scoring fights as a whole, an inherent weakness in a system that no scoring system ever, whether you're talking pride rules or the 10-point must system or God knows what, no scoring system is going to be able to look at this fight and definitively say that one guy won.
Yeah.
It's a close fight.
It's a close
fight.
With
that said,
it was a great fight.
Let's talk about it being a great fight, because it was a great fight.
Yes, let's talk about how it played out, why it played out the way it did. And the first thing I want to talk about, because I went into this, both you and I did, I guess, with pretty heavy expectations for how amazing Bob Lawler was going to be. Not as amazing as I thought. And part of that, I think, hinged on what seemed to be an inordinate reliance on looping punches. Mm-hmm. Did that stand out to you as well?
It absolutely did. And this was something I retweeted during the fight. I saw Eve Edwards, longtime training partner of Brutal Bob Lawler at American Top Team, UFC analyst, longtime veteran of the sport. Eve picked up on this, I think, as early as the second round.
Yeah.
That Lawler wasn't jabbing. Lawler did not use his jab at all in this entire fight. That's what really stood out to me. Like, so I think he had kind of decided going into it, he and his coaches, that if he was going to win this fight, he either needed to knock Condit out or he needed to produce enough big moments that he could sway the judges, that he wasn't going to score with Condit. And so I think he thinks of his jab as a scoring tool, and he didn't use it at all. So that's why those rounds were so lopsided. This was not the volume that we got used to seeing from Lawler when he fought Hendricks both times, when he fought Matt Brown, when he was landing his jab, 20, 25, 30 times a fight. That just was not there at all.
And even in the McDonald fight, which was the McDonald rematch, that is, which was a pretty different Lawler from the one in the second Hendricks fight where it was all like, these massive bursts of crazy volume. There wasn't much of that in the second McDonald fight. It was more reserved, but it was a Lawler who understood how to apply volume and how to use that to set up his bigger shots. Mm-hmm. And in this fight, it was... Because we said beforehand, Robbie Lawler, he has a gambit. He's a gambler as a fighter. He often gives away long stretches of the fight judging his openings. In this fight, he didn't ever really seem to be calculating as much because there was a lot of just waiting or waiting for a big shot rather than forcing Condit to open himself up, giving him things to think about, sticking his hands out there, hand fighting, jabbing, just poking him and touching him. There wasn't much of that. It was really a lot of big looping bombs. I have to wonder, because this only became known to me just before the fight, but Matt Pena, who was Robbie Lawler's boxing coach, I think all the way from the time of his first UFC run, retired after the Rory McDonald fight.
Oh, did he really?
So he's no longer with Robbie Lawler. And I wonder if, and he basically, I think we probably owe a lot of what we recognize as the brilliance of Robbie Lawler's striking to Matt Pena, because Pena talks about how he taught Robbie, who was this crazy swinging slugger, he tried to instill in him the sweet science, as he called it, rhythm and timing and measuring and setting the opponent up and defending himself. These were the things that Pena said that he tried to espouse. And we can probably celebrate his influence in watching, the Hendricks fights and the McDonald fight, the Brown fight. And it was a different man in there in the Condit fight. King Mo is in his corner now instead of Matt Pena. I wonder if that had a significant impact on the fighter that showed up.
I would not be surprised if it did. I think, it was kind of puzzling to me that because, as you pointed out, even in the McDonald fight, Lawler was still dropping jabs in there.
Yeah.
He was still measuring with his lead hand. He was using his lead hand effectively, and that just was not there at all.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent that was partially Condit too, that Condit was doing a lot of messing around with his lead hand. He was doing a lot of measuring and hand fighting. And so maybe Lawler thought, well, if he's going to do it for me, I don't need to do it. Like, I think he was still being calculating. He was still, the wheels were still turning. He was still picking and choosing his spots to plant his feet and throw volume. He still did a pretty good job of judging distance. He threw very accurately when he threw. But he did not force Condit into doing the kinds of things that he normally did.
No, absolutely not. It was a puzzling thing to watch. It really was. But to give Condit credit.
Well, I mean, this was much closer to Strikeforce Lawler than it was the Lawler we've seen in the last few fights. And so, not that I'm disappointed in that, because there's still obviously a ton of craft to what Lawler was doing, and especially that fifth round was something special in terms of violence and willpower. I mean, I think especially Lawler's footwork was really good, but it was a little disappointing from the perspective of offensive craft.
Yeah, I thought his defense was really solid too. There were a couple times where he was clipped. The first knockdown, kind of questionable how off balance he really was, because he was shoved over as he got clipped on the jaw. Seemed to recover just fine. Fourth round, he was pretty badly hurt by a combination of a left hook on the jaw and a right hand behind the ear that had him on wobbly legs. And so, you wouldn't necessarily walk away from a fight with a guy who got hurt that much and say his defense was perfect. But I think, I've been kind of fascinated by this ever since we brought it up on the show. Just watching Robbie Lawler's old fights, seeing him in slow motion. To me, Robbie Lawler is kind of the Roberto Duran of MMA with his defense, where it's maybe not textbook perfect. He very rarely slips outside the left hand without throwing a simultaneous shot of his own. His head movement is kind of limited in some ways. It's not a lot of variation, but he's very difficult to hit clean. And that was Duran's thing, was that you could throw right hand after right hand at Roberto Duran. Even when you touched his chin, it was very difficult to really knock his head back with a right hand, which obviously wasn't the same case for Carlos Condit in this fight, who, when he did get hit, it really seemed to have an effect.
Yeah, it was real. Well, and not just what he was doing in terms of his active defense with moving his head and all of that, but his footwork was insanely good. It seemed to me like Lawler's priorities in this fight were he had a two-pronged approach. That first off, he was going to try to pressure Condit, and Condit was much harder to pin against the fence, I think, than Lawler thought that he would be. And that even when he did get him back there, Condit didn't just kind of let Lawler go to town like he has at some points in the past. Condit's movement was really good.
Yes.
So then Lawler turned into a counterpuncher. I think that Lawler went through really long stretches where he's like, okay, I'm just going to counter him. I'm going to let him come to me, and we're going to go there. But if that's going to be your strategy, then you need to not let Carlos Condit ever pin you against the fence, because Condit's a wood chipper. If he gets you backed up, it's flying knees, it's the double collar tie, it's elbows, it's repeated flurries with his hands. Like, that's when you're in trouble. And so Lawler, aside from that one stretch in the fourth round where he got himself hurt, Lawler's back never touched the fence.
And he did not allow Condit to back him up in straight lines, and that's when Condit is also very dangerous. When you are retreating or in straight lines or ducking your head, that's when, because Condit's often vulnerable because he expects you to go back in straight lines, right? Like the knockdown that happened in the second round when Lawler hit him. Classic Condit. He comes in with a faked right hand, left uppercut. He tries to shift, and suddenly Lawler's just still there in front of him. He hasn't backed up. He stood his ground and used his head movement to avoid the strikes, and he hits him with a right hook as Condit's feet are square because he couldn't complete his shift. He's in this horribly awkward position, and he goes down like a sack of oats. That's the way to fight Carlos Condit. There just wasn't enough of it, and I think there wasn't enough because Lawler wasn't setting it up. He wasn't creating those openings. He wasn't hiding his shots. He gave Carlos Condit, who has pretty horrible defense by elite fighter standards, the chance to look like an okay defensive fighter by about the third and fourth round, where he wasn't able to judge him just because Condit was refusing to walk in as much. He wasn't walking into the shots, and Lawler wasn't able to set him up because he was only looking for the overhand left and the wide right hook. That was it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was by Condit's design. I think that Condit and his coaches are perfectly aware of what a sharp counterpuncher Lawler is.
Yeah, sure.
So what do you do to a counterpuncher? You overload him with information. A counterpuncher is going to rely on being able to time you, to have triggers for the kinds of shots that you're going to throw at him. And Condit just overloaded him with information. Too many diverse setups, too many angles, too many lines on which he was attacking. You didn't know whether he was going to start with a kick and come back with punches, start with punches, finish with a kick, go from kick to kick, punches to elbows, flying knee.
You know what this is kind of like? This kind of reminds me of the old school fight between Robbie Lawler and Nick Diaz, where Lawler was obviously the more powerful puncher and he was looking to bite down in these big counters. And yes, he was able to land at times, but Diaz was giving him trouble because just by throwing volume, almost by virtue of the fact that he was not sitting down in his punches. Because Condit can sit down in a shot and hit surprisingly hard, but for the most part, he doesn't get his legs into his punches. He doesn't sit down that well. He just kind of throws out volume and tries to push you back. And there were some moments in this fight where Condit would land 4 or 5 cuffing, glancing shots in a row, and Lawler would just have to shell up because he realized he wasn't going to be able to find an opening or defend well enough to throw back while Condit was throwing. Just the volume was too much.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you do to a counterpuncher. You just show him too much. You show him too many things for him to be able to pick and choose his shots. Like most great counterpunchers want to work at a pretty slow pace, and I think that Lawler certainly fits into that. Like, it was unexpected when Lawler came out flashing his jab and scoring as much as he did in that stretch between the first Hendricks fight. Then Ellenberger, Matt Brown, and into the second Hendricks fight, he had kind of backed off it a little bit. But that's because that's never really been Lawler. Yeah. He's never been a guy who wants to come out and put volume on you. He always wants to keep it fairly slow, fairly measured, and pick and choose his opportunities to land on you.
And you and I saw that as an adaptation to turn in a low volume power puncher into a volume puncher, just kind of throwing away shots just to create kind of false volume, to give the other guy something to think about, to keep yourself in the game while you think of your next big opening.
And so Condit did a whole lot to take that away.
Yeah.
From him. Like, not just that maybe Lawler didn't come in with that as a plan. I think, honest to God, I think if you were to ask, I think they probably came to the conclusion that there was just no way they were going to keep up anyway. And so they kind of went whole hog the other direction.
Well, evidently his corner was screaming at him to jab throughout the fight.
Oh, were they really? And he just didn't do it?
And it wasn't. And that's the trouble with Robbie Lawler, right? He really just kind of, I think Lawler often gets into this zone where he gets into his head an idea of how he has to beat his opponent. And he's a genius at finding how to make that work. You know, when he fought Hendricks, he started off that fight landing a hard low kick, the first Hendricks fight, and then didn't throw any more kicks. And we saw how effective a weapon his left kick had become since his return to the UFC. It just wasn't there. And Hendricks wasn't really looking for that many takedowns. It probably would have been an option to mix up these boxing exchanges they were having. It didn't happen. Likewise, when he fought McDonald, his left body kick could have been there. He decided to jab with them. It's almost like he sees what the opponent's trying to do to him and locks in on trying to outdo them at that. And so even with his corner screaming at him to jab, get the jab out there, he sees Condit throwing all this weird shit, and he's like, man, I know I can knock this guy's head off. And it was vintage Robbie Lawler and not in a good way. But it was a trait that I think Lawler has had even through his UFC run.
That's a really, really good point, Connor. I think you're absolutely right about that. Because especially knowing that that was a thing that they wanted him to do and he just wouldn't do it anyway. Yeah. That is the most Robbie Lawler thing.
Yes. Right, Robbie Lawler, he's a hard-headed son of a bitch.
Yeah. I mean, in every possible way. He's
a
hard-headed son of a bitch.
Yes.
And that's what we love about Brutal Bob. But it was a thing that it was definitely a thing that made this fight a lot harder than it needed to be for him. Like there were ways for him to keep this closer and open up more opportunities that he just did not take advantage of. But with that said, I think Condit knew his man, and I think Condit's coaches knew their man. Yeah,
we can't take too much away from Condit by just saying how poor Robbie Lawler looked in comparison to our expectations. Condit came in and looked really well prepared.
Because I think Condit and his coaches knew that if you can suck Lawler into that kind of fight, if you can confuse him, if you can make him think, then you can make Robbie Lawler a much less impressive looking fighter.
Yeah.
Like, I think that they came into this fight thinking, how do we take away Lawler's jab? How do we take away his ability to create those openings? And that's why when you can suck Lawler into fighting purely off of his back foot, he's a much, much less dangerous fighter. Like, as strange as that sounds, because you think, okay, well, I'm going to be walking into a counterpuncher's wheelhouse. Like when you can take away his ability to force those openings, when you minimize his opportunities and say, I want Lawler throwing 5 strikes a minute instead of 10. Even if those are all 5 of those are going to be power punches, those are much less dangerous shots than if he's setting them up with his jab, if he's forcing you to react to other things. Like Lawler's right hook is a great punch. Lawler's right hook is a lot less dangerous without the jab to pull your hand away.
Yes,
and force your head to move.
Because he's not really a defined counterpuncher. I'd probably call him a boxer puncher if nothing else. Sometimes even just a puncher. And really the thing with Robbie Lawler is he has great counters. So I think it's too easy to go in and say, because even before this fight, I think, I don't know if you said it, but I think I certainly said that if he wants to come forward, he can pressure Condit, and Condit's hittable. If he wants to counter, then he'll be able to hit Condit because Condit's hittable. As it turns out, Robbie Lawler's counters are really just an integrated part of a whole other game, where if it's all he has, then, because you notice his counters are often his biggest shots in a fight. Where when he's fighting Hendricks, the counter uppercut he lands, the counter. Well, there were 2 vicious counter uppercuts in that first fight. The counter straight left against Rory McDonald. These things are often his biggest strikes that really change the momentum of a bout. So they stand out in your mind, but really they're maybe 10% of his total punches. Where he's finding these counters in the flow of his fighting style, not fighting as a guy who only wants to counter. And when he can only counter, I think it really diminishes him. Condit did a fantastic job of taking that away. Condit is one of these guys that you just have to love because you watch him and he seems to be working with kind of a limited skill set, where he's had these same problems he has now for his entire career. He's always been pretty hittable. He's always not been a particularly hard puncher. He's always had great stamina, but kind of, I don't know that Condit's really a great athlete. He's kind of awkward, where he doesn't seem to move how athletic people move. Whereas if you watch Robbie Lawler, there's just a certain rhythm to him where you're like, yeah, this guy has been doing sports his entire life, and if he wasn't fighting, he'd be doing something else. Carlos Condit is a guy who loves to fight, who is just kind of a weird fighter, which is maybe why he's so much more dedicated and as you said to me recently, seems to think it's weird that other fighters don't stay in shape out of camp. Because for Carlos, he's not a guy who's ever gotten by on his natural talents. Mm-hmm. He's not a guy who is used to the idea of, I can just quickly cut weight and still perform. For him, everything is discipline. Everything is hard work. And so it seems ludicrous to him to try and throw that away just to have an extra slice of pizza when you're not having a fight. And that, I think, really came through in this fight where Condit, that awkwardness worked to his advantage. And he has found all of these ways to implement a style that really wouldn't work for all of the more athletic opponents he's facing. And then, of course, he's just ridiculously durable and tough. And, I was really impressed by it. I thought the fight itself was fantastic. Both guys had brilliant moments. I would celebrate still the natural ability that Robbie Lawler has and how brilliant he is at finding openings for his punches. But you got to give Carlos Condit credit for coming in with a picture-perfect game plan.
Yeah, I mean, the 5th round of this fight is the best round, I would say, in an MMA fight ever.
Yeah, it just might be. It really might be. It was. I've never seen Carlos Condit so exhausted after a fight.
Nope.
So dead tired and so beaten up. Carlos Condit went from, because Carlos, he rarely shows damage, like his opponents do. Picture the GSP fight where he clearly lost, but looked the same as when he went in, while GSP was cut and bruised.
Aside from that one big ass gash on his cheek.
Sure, but even then, he looked like an anime character with a scar. Like it's always he bruises stylishly, where he still looks like this handsome guy. It doesn't look like he's really been in a fight, and. He went from that to 2 black eyes and a puffy, battered face in the space of 5 minutes. And likewise for Lawler, who went from looking okay to looking beaten up. Both guys landing huge shots. That's the thing with Robbie Lawler. That's, I think, why you have to love him, because he knew he was behind in this fight. I think he really felt that his corner must have told him, and no matter how much he didn't listen to them throughout the bout, when he heard you're behind, or when he felt in his heart of hearts, I'm behind, I need to win, he came out like few other fighters can. It's really difficult for most people to convince themselves to just throw caution to the wind in that way. And, man, he went for it.
And to be able to do that while still maintaining a semblance of an intelligent approach.
Right. Yeah.
Like
it's being dead tired and winging giant sloppy punches and still not being easy to hit and still like finding different ways to mix in your limited array of shots. Crazy.
Yeah. So contrast that with somebody like here. This is the example that I always use. Georgi Karakhanyan fought Patricio Pitbull back in like 2010 or 2011 in Bellator. And going into the third round, Karakhanyan had clearly lost the first 2 rounds. And his corner tells him, you need to go out there and you need to finish this fight. Karakhanyan goes out there, super aggressive, and Pitbull knocks him out in the third round.
Right.
Now, so good, Karakhanyan recognized that he was going to drop a decision. Otherwise, he needed to go out there and try real hard. But he did so in a fashion that left him totally open to a much better and much more powerful puncher. Robbie Lawler, when he comes out there, knows he needs to win the fight. Lawler doesn't abandon the stuff that makes him dangerous in the first place.
Yeah, and when I say throw caution to the wind, it's not that Robbie Lawler suddenly stops being the same fighter. It's that he sees all the same openings and kind of just lowers the threshold for what is an opening worth capitalizing on.
Yes, exactly that.
Yeah, there's always a certain element of risk where Lawler, when he fights, is always calculating, is it worth to bite on this? Is it worth to go for this counter? Is he here to hit me with this? When he comes out and he's looking for the kill, it goes from like 90% of the things are not worth attacking to like 50%, where he's like, okay, there's a decent chance I'm going to land. I am fucking going for it. And he just, he attacks every single thing that it is reasonably, and it's because you can tell he's still cognizant because he wasn't getting destroyed doing this. He wasn't walking into gigantic counters. There are moments where he had to back off, but he was still defending himself, still pivoting after landing these gigantic bombs. Still trying to cut off the cage. Things were a little sloppier because he was going for the kill, but he was still just kind of a laser-guided killing machine.
Only round he jabbed. Only round he jabbed.
Isn't that the crazy thing?
In the midst of those big-ass flurries, some of those punches were jabs. He caught Condit with a few clean jabs. Like
That's
God
ridiculous.
See, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what Robbie Lawler's future holds. I don't know what Carlos Condit's future holds, whether he's going to retire or not. I do know that the version of Robbie Lawler that we've seen since he came back into the UFC in 2013 is one of the all-time great MMA strikers, even if he doesn't look like somebody like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, where everything is just technically perfect all the time. I know that Carlos Condit is one of the greatest welterweights in MMA history, and like the stuff that he too has accomplished in the last few years, win or lose, like he's now 2-4 in his last 6 fights. Do you think any less of Carlos Condit after losing those 4 fights?
Absolutely not. It's two guys who have incredible stories that wrapped up together. I really think that's what we should be discussing, and maybe looking forward to a rematch. I'd certainly love to see a rematch. The UFC apparently has already tagged Tyron Woodley as Lawler's next fight. I'm happy to see that as well. But I really think we should celebrate what a great fight it was, and not get so worked up about the fact that it was close, because that's just the nature of fighting. And unless the fact that Condit lost makes you think less of him as a fan, and that's a flawed viewpoint. But unless that's the case, you shouldn't worry that much about a loss, because you can go into your future as an old school MMA fan 30 years from now when your kids are starting to watch fights. You can say, look, here's Carlos Condit, and they'll look through whatever his equivalent of a box rec record is and say, oh, he lost all these fights. You're like, listen, son, he was a warrior, and here's how those fights really went down, and you'll know. And that's what makes like delving into boxing history so fun. You can't just look at a box record and understand the quality of a fighter. You have to see him fight and realize what he was willing to put himself through. Carlos Condit is a sterling example of a fighter who will go through anything to win, and even if it didn't work out for him against some of the elite.
Absolutely. Two memorable guys in an incredibly memorable fight, and what a way to cap it off. Like really and truly, 5th round of that fight, best round from a technical and action perspective and a heart perspective, I think, in the history of this sport.
Yeah, I'll have to give it 6 months of breathing room, but I don't think I can disagree with you at this time. I think it was truly something to see. So we'll let that conclude our discussion of that fantastic fight and take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to discuss some of the other interesting fights in this card. I think we had our eyes on Tumanov Larkin. Is that what we were going to talk about?
Tumanov Larkin and Poirier Duffy, I think, are going to get some attention from us.
Ooh, yes. Tumanov Larkin, Poirier Duffy, both of those after this break. Okay, wait, stop. Don't skip this break. I know you skip most of them. It's a podcast. It's not a radio show. You don't have to listen to the commercials. But If you follow my very simple instructions, you'll be doing a huge service to Heavy Hands, Pat, and myself. First, go to Stitcher.com or iTunes.com. You can use either of those services to subscribe to the show, which makes it really, really easy to listen to every episode and not have to go hunting for it on our confusing, badly designed website. Once you're there, give us a positive rating and a positive review. That means go to the little 5-star thing and click on the star all the way to the right. That's a 5-star rating. That's the best one you could possibly give us, and like 20 or 30 words about how you enjoy the show. It may not seem like much, but it's a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. It helps us bring Heavy Hands to an ever-increasing audience, which is just good for everybody. So thank you for listening. Please take the time to give us a positive rating and review. Next time that you're on at your computer, at your phone, whatever, iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, search for Heavy Hands, give a positive rating and a review. Thank you. And now, back to the show. And we are back. Before we get into our discussion of the preliminary and undercard fights from last weekend's event, I want to thank a couple of people who donated to support the show in the month of December. First up, we have... Sorry, I don't know if it's Angel or Angel. It's Angel Jambazov, Jake Christina, Mark Guagenti, Matt Giordano, Ben Cohn, and Shane Walsh. Thank you, all of you guys, for pledging to Heavy Hands on Patreon and supporting the show, becoming patrons. If you are one of those who pledged $20 or more, please give us your suggestions for a segment. We will try to discuss in detail for about 20 minutes, basically 15 to 20 minutes of full discussion, like a mega version of a heavy bag question. If you donated $5 or more, up to 20, then give us your heavy bag questions. Send us a message on Patreon. We're eager to answer your guys' questions. A lot of you guys have pledged. We appreciate it, but we don't have questions from you. Send them to us on Patreon so we can get to it, because we want to try to thank you guys for helping us out. Now on to the fights. Albert Tumanov versus Lorenz Larkin is the one we're going to discuss first. Did this one live up to your expectations, Pat?
It didn't, not quite in the violence category, but definitely from a technical perspective it did. And it was one of those fights where I walked away thinking that both guys were better than I thought they were going into it, especially Larkin. I was really surprised by some of the improvements that Larkin showed. Go on. Oh, go ahead.
No, go on, sorry.
To the extent that I think both are pretty firmly, in my mind, top 10 to 15 welterweights. This is not to get too far off track from the technical stuff that we usually talk about, but there's going to be, in the next about year and a half, there's going to be a lot of turnover at the top of the welterweight division, just because it's full of guys who are getting older and who are kind of reaching the end of their careers. Like Lawler is a 15-year veteran. I hate to break it to all the Bob Lawler fans out there, myself included, but he isn't going to be fighting at this level forever.
Right.
Same deal with Carlos Condit. He's a 13-year veteran. He's 31. He's been in a lot of wars. Like, he's not going to stick around at this level forever. Yeah. Dong Hyun Kim is like 34. Even Stephen Thompson, I think, is in his early 30s and could fall off. Matt Brown is in his mid 30s. Damian Maia is almost 40. Like, there's going to be a lot of turnover at the top of this division. And I think that both Larkin and Tumanov are going to be fixtures in the top 10 for a while moving forward. They both showed off that kind of ability here. Yeah,
it was a really credible performance. It reminded me in a lot of ways of Jędrzejczyk Letourneau, where we expected it to be a very different kind of fight, and it ended up being both more competitive and maybe a little more interesting to rewatch than we thought it would be, where it wasn't just a kind of... I expected this one to be very fast-paced. Evidently, Tumanov had kind of a bad weight cut and was sick leading up to the fight, which kind of explains that he had a little bit of difficulty as the fight went on, keeping up with Larkin. Also, the fact that his leg was being battered explains some of that, I think. But, Tumanov comes in, shows that he's an accurate puncher. He really, really showed the quality of his body punching. I think most of his really significant shots were with that left hook to the body, and he set it up beautifully throughout the fight. And then Larkin... he seems to be developing much in the same way that Uriah Hall is, where both of them are these insanely fast, powerful, athletic fighters with great finishing potential on big, flashy single strikes and a desire to just do what looks cool, and that has often bit them in the past. And both of them seem to be developing some of the more fundamental strategic areas of their game, where no, Larkin could not box with Tumanov, not at all. Both defensively and offensively, his punching and his head movement and everything was just really not as good. as Tumanov. What were the? I know we don't use fight stats to argue for winners, but what were the statistics from that first round again for head strikes?
Larkin went a cool 0 for 17 in punching at Tumanov's head in the first round.
Yeah.
And almost all of Tumanov's shots were to the head and body there. I'll pull up the exact ones here. I'll pull up the exact statistics here. Like, it's an interesting fight. And Connor, you and I argued a very great deal about this beforehand.
Yeah.
Like, because I think it would be totally insane to score that fight for Larkin. As one of the judges did. I don't think that even if you're landing good hard low kicks, that outweighs work to the head and body. And Connor, your point is that if the shots are cleaner to the legs, and they're clearly doing
for me,
damage,
if it's a scoring shot, I just evaluate them all equally and determine which is best based on which is cleanest. So.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of disagree with that. I think they're both valid. I think based on the rules that we read earlier, you could certainly read the rules. You could certainly read the rules either way.
Lorenz Larkin is the new Uriah Hall in more ways than one, because Uriah, he's tearing our relationship apart, Pat.
Oh yeah. Well, what is happening here? What is going on?
He's caused a real rift between us. It's Flukegate all over again.
So look at these statistics. It's a really interesting fight from a statistical perspective. So Larkin goes 0 for 17 on headshots in the first round, 4 for 32 in the second round, and 8 for 35 in the third. So he got really, I think, surprised by how clean and sharp Tumanov's counterpunching game was. That he was throwing a lot of lead right hands, as you pointed out when we were talking earlier, Connor, that were nowhere close.
Yeah.
Because he was afraid if he overcommitted to them, if he stepped all the way into Tumanov's punching range, he was going to eat a good hard punching combination right back from him.
Probably because that exact thing happened whenever he tried to flurry early on.
Yeah, he's just not on that level in terms of throwing hands. But to his credit, where a lot of fighters would have seen their initial game plan of, okay, I'm going to throw good hard hands, I'm going to follow up with low kicks, I'm going to work in the flashy stuff, stay away from the fence. A lot of fighters, when they're getting stalked and every time they try and throw hands they get countered, they more or less give up, or they kind of think, okay, I'm going to stick and move, I'm not really going to commit to anything, maybe try and ride this out. Larkin was like, oh, well, but my low kicks are working. And so he went to a game plan that consisted, for the better part of 2 rounds, almost entirely of throwing low kicks. And it worked.
Which isn't to say he stopped throwing his hands. That's the thing that I think is really important here. Because Larkin, I will agree with that, and I can say from personal experience, there are a few things more demoralizing in a sparring session, or I imagine a fight is even worse with the emotions running higher, than constantly going for your opponent's head and not even being able to scuff them with your glove. Meanwhile, you're being hit in the head in return. That's very, very frustrating and very disheartening. And what happens with most fighters, I think, is they just stop throwing. Larkin, not only did he keep going for occasional head strikes, just kind of peppering them in as pot shots to make Tumanov respect the fact that his hands were still there. At the very least, Tumanov had to keep dodging his punches. But then he really started to attack the openings that were there, which is really how you're supposed to use a jab, right? I always think of the example of Curtis Stevens versus Hassan Endam in boxing. And Curtis's problem is, I think, that he's pretty poorly trained, and he's an extremely talented fighter. He's very fast, he's very powerful, takes a good shot, has good understanding of distance. But against a boxer like Hassan Endam and Jakam, he really struggled to land his jab. And his corner just kept telling him in this fight, use your jab. And they clearly hadn't done their work beforehand and weren't doing their work in the moment of explaining what that means. Because for Larkin, use your punches as an element of the whole striking didn't mean that the punches had to land. And he was smart enough and poised enough to recognize that. All it meant was that he had to make them something that Tumanov had to look at in order to let the kicks land. And even if he wasn't setting them up a lot by like throwing a punch and then throwing a kick right after it, he was constantly showing a different variety of things, trying a knee now and then, trying an elbow, left hook or a lead right, occasionally a jab, movement, and then using both of his kicks to set up the other. There was a moment where he faked a switch kick and then did a kind of a double switch, like Sanchai style, to throw a right low kick instead. Very tricky. And he just made all of the whole realm of what he can do offensively a threat, even when most of it wasn't working at all, wasn't actually doing any damage. I thought that was really impressive.
Yeah, it was a tremendous performance from Larkin, and it's like now you can see okay, this is why everybody was so high on him back when he was fighting as high as 205 back in Strikeforce. Like,
Yeah.
the talent, the level of talent that he has, and the amount of experience he has too against some really, really, really good fighters at this point, you can see the kind of potential that he still has. I genuinely think he's going to be a top 10 fighter in this division. That was a close fight. It showcased a lot of his improvements and developments. His defense looked better than it ever has. He's still not a good defensive fighter when it comes to punches. He does a lot of weird things after he throws, like he turns his head and he opens up the side of his jaw to being clipped by counters.
Yeah.
He doesn't really bring his hands back to his chin after he throws. Like he does a lot of things that frankly better coaches probably would have fixed a long time ago.
He stands up really tall. That's my least favorite. He stands up tall and leans back as he turns. Yeah. Just like waiting for a right hand across the jaw, a la Costas Philippou, you know.
And he almost got murdered by Albert Tumanov a number of times doing exactly that. Thoughts that I thought were kind of landing or were glancing shots that didn't actually land, but man, he came close to getting his lights shut off.
Tumanov would have probably actually benefited from going for a couple of overhands or wide rights. I think he really would have clipped Larkin while he was cutting those really risky pivots, leaning back and standing up tall, trying to get away from the fence. Tumanov had gone for one good, heavy, sweeping right hand rather than the straight right that he usually throws. I really think he probably would have gotten Larkin out of there.
So, interesting question here about Tumanov. Do you think, this just kind of occurred to me, do you think that he is the most classical Russian boxer of any of the guys we've seen move into MMA?
Yeah, definitely. I think he's up there with Magomedov.
But except Magomedov will throw a lot more of those looping punches in ways that Tumanov won't. Like everything Tumanov throws is straight and technical and clean. He's a
really schooled looking boxer. Sometimes, I guess, to his detriment, where he's really looking for these really classical openings and things, and it could help him to loosen up a little. But I mean, he's so dangerous, and I complain so much about fighters who are sloppy. I can't bring myself to complain about the fact that Tumanov throws mostly straight punches.
Well, he's so efficient. Like that's the thing that really stands out to me about him is like we were talking beforehand, and you made the point that like, man, Tumanov wasn't landing the kinds of shots or the number of shots that he usually does. And then you go and you look at the statistics and he's still landing like 5 strikes a minute,
right?
Which is crazy high volume. And you're like, oh, but I expected more from him.
Yes. We just have a really high expectation. To me, it looked like a fight where, Tumanov looked like he was trying to conserve his energy. In retrospect, the sickness and the bad weight cut both make sense. It looked like he was trying not to just kind of exhaust himself by going too hard early. But yeah, taken in the big picture, that's only because I normally expect Tumanov to throw about twice as much of what was already a very respectable punch output.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think bright things looking ahead for both guys. I genuinely think that Tumanov has perhaps champion type of potential. I think Larkin, if he kind of continues to make improvements, is destined to hang out around the fringes of the top 10, maybe even a little higher if he gets the right matchup.
Yeah, Larkin to me is like an elite gatekeeper because I think you will probably always know what his flaws and openings are. Tumanov, I think, has more potential to change things up because he has such a good solid base of fundamentals. He has more opportunities to be an unpredictable elite level fighter in the future.
Yeah, because we don't talk about this all that much with Tumanov, but he's also an excellent wrestler. He's a really, really good wrestler. And I think he kind of went into this fight thinking, like, Larkin has really good takedown defense. Why waste your energy? If he gives you the openings, maybe look for something, but don't waste your time.
Yeah, which was smart. Larkin's incredibly hard to put down and even harder to hold down. So it was a fascinating fight, a really tactical back and forth affair. How about Dustin Poirier versus Joe Duffy, though?
Oh, sweet Mary. That fight, I was surprised by the outcome, and I was surprised by some of the things that happened. But in broad outline, especially the first round, I thought would have been a contender for round of the year, if not for what Robbie Lawler and Carlos Condit had done after that. It showed the first round was how I thought the fight would mostly go, minus the seeming ease with which Poirier took him down. But
yes.
On reflection, it speaks well to Poirier's experience and how good American Top Team in particular is at teaching those precise things. Like, I really think American Top Team is the most MMA adapted wrestling and grappling team out there.
Probably. I noticed that Poirier now has Kami Barzini in his corner. Robbie Lawler's wrestling coach. Lawler's counter wrestling has looked phenomenal since winning his title. He has been incredibly difficult to take down, much, much harder to hold down, and more willing to really punish opponents who try to take him down. Poirier, likewise, looked better than ever in terms of offensive wrestling and really made it a gel with the rest of his game. And boy, did I really underrate how effective his ground and pound was. And
see, that's what occurs to me here is it's not just the wrestling and the grappling, it's the MMA specific iterations of those, right? So it's not just the wrestling, it's cage wrestling. It's not just grappling, it's top position grappling with your opponent's hips smashed close to the fence to shut them down. Like the shot that changed the fight more than anything else was that elbow that Poirier landed as Duffy was trying to wall walk. That he shut down, Poirier did very, very effectively.
Yes, I remember
everything, that. Everything that Duffy thought he could do to escape, to get back to his feet, he sucked him into thinking that he could fight off his back close to the fence, which is that's it should be day one MMA stuff, is don't try and play off your back close to the fence because there's nowhere for your hips to go. But Poirier, by virtue of the way that he attacked Duffy as he was trying to get back to his feet, made Duffy think that was his only way out of that.
Well, because I've seen what Poirier was trying to do as a futile struggle too many times, where a fighter will bring the opponent down next to the fence, they'll have their arms wrapped around their legs or their hips, and they basically just have their shoulder buried against their stomach. They've finished the double leg, but the opening is there to wall walk. And Poirier did such a fantastic job of locking Duffy down just long enough to get him into grappling mode before standing and landing a hard shot. And there were a ton of moments in this fight where Poirier was grappling with Duffy, where he would be going for something grappling specific, trying to set up a submission or a pass, and then he would hit Duffy while Duffy was clearly just thinking of his next move in terms of jiu-jitsu. And the one that really stood out to me was a classic, and it always cracks me up when I see it because it's so comically, it's a very funny setup. I don't know why. Where Poirier is in full guard and reaches back to play with Duffy's ankles to try and break his ankles apart, which is obviously a no-no for jiu-jitsu, and I think that's why it works so well, because the person on bottom thinks, oh, he's an idiot, I'm going to triangle him the moment he breaks my legs apart. The moment he snakes his arm inside my ankle, and then the moment you think they're paying attention to what you're doing with your hand, you just turn around and crack them in the jaw with the same hand.
Yep.
And Poirier did this to beautiful effect to Duffy, where he just reached back, played with the ankle for about a second, and then just walloped him with this big diving overhand right to the jaw. There were a ton of moments like that. And I think it was our friend of the show, James Kimball, who pointed out Duffy probably picked that trick up the first time when Chan Sung Jung did it to him in their fight.
Poirier.
Poirier, yes. Poirier probably picked it up when Chan Sung Jung, when Korean Zombie did it to him in their fight. Because it's a great move. It works so well.
And I think it's a thing that they teach at ATT.
Sure.
Over and over again.
It's the same as
Bektic does the same thing.
Yeah. It's the same as the guard pass punch. It's a classic, and it works in context. It's a classic MMA move. It's one of these things that I think, as we continue to see this sport develop, are going to be seen as fundamental setups, where we recognize the cross counter as a fundamental thing in boxing, or the catch and jab. It's going to be the diving guard pass punch. It's going to be the guard break right hand. It's going to be these kind of moves. Just as we see the two punches to the body and the elbow to the head on the ground, these sort of tactical setups that blend the striking with the grappling. I thought that was what stood out about Poirier's game. He looked phenomenal. He looked really, really great, and I have really high hopes for his future at lightweight as a result of that fight.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to forget. Think about the parallels here between Dustin Poirier and Lorenz Larkin, though they had different outcomes in their fights on Saturday night. Like that, both of them are guys who started fighting in 2009. They're both young. They're both only now getting into their late 20s. So they're just now coming into their primes. But because they had so much experience against high-level guys earlier in their careers, it was easy, and fights that didn't always go their way, it was easy to say, well, this is probably as good as Dustin Poirier is ever going to get, or this is probably as good as Lorenz Larkin is ever going to get. But think about this. They're in basically the same position as Carlos Condit was in 2008.
Sure.
So just before Carlos Condit came to the UFC. That's the same point that these guys are at career-wise,
Robbie
where
Lawler.
Jose Aldo was in 2010.
Robbie Lawler when he got kicked out of the UFC.
Yeah, this is Robbie Lawler when he went and flying kneed. Was it Danilo Villafort in Pride. Who did he flying knee and just about kill? Or Ruben Villarreal?
Yes.
Ruben Villarreal. That he flying knee just about killed at that Pride show in Vegas. Like, that's where these guys are at in terms of the overall course of their careers. So they're going to get better. They're both still potentially championship level fighters.
I'm not sure what that flying knee is. I'm looking for it on his record.
I
don't see Ruben Villarreal on here.
Let me see. When was this?
Was it? Joey Villasenor.
Joey Villasenor. I get all those guys confused.
Villasenor, I'm guessing it is.
That on my part. Yeah, Joey Villasenor. Back in 2006 or 2007.
Yep, 2006.
Yeah, that's where those guys are at in terms of the overall scope of their career. So don't write them off.
No, absolutely
they both
not.
Still have a tremendous amount of room to get better.
Yeah, absolutely. So fantastic fight. I think we're going to wrap up this segment with that. When we come back, we have a couple of questions from people who have donated and pledged to the show on Patreon. A couple of heavy bag questions to get to, and then we'll wrap up the show after that. Okay, so here's another way you can help us out. Go to your couch, lift up the cushions, and scrounge around in the creases for change, lint, like bent paper clips, like a thumbtack that you stab your thumb on and then you scream alone in your living room. Throw all the stuff out except the change. All right, now take that and deposit it into your bank account or your PayPal account. Head over to heavyhandspodcast.com and click on the donate button on the right side of your screen. Whatever money you just found, which you weren't using anyway, send it to us, all right? Because Pat and I will use it. That money helps us keep this show on the air and free of charge, which is great for you. It's great for us because that way we're making a little bit of money. The donations are a huge deal for us. So please go to heavyhandspodcast.com. Any spare change that you might have lying around, hit the donate button on the right side of the screen and send it our way to help us keep this show live. Thanks. And now back to Heavy Hands. And we are back. And as I mentioned before the break, a couple of heavy bag questions for you. Our first question comes to us courtesy of Patreon patron Ruben von Zandvoort, and he asks, let's say you, Pat, he's talking to you here, I think. Let's say you are allowed to make any changes you wish to improve the UFC as a product. What would they be? Scoring system, judges, and refs? Which ones should get the axe immediately? Commentators, round length rules, tournaments. You could share your thoughts on how the actual broadcast could be improved. What do you say? We rarely talk about the sort of the layout of the sport, the way that it's presented and the way that it's officiated. But what would you say in response to that, Pat?
Knees to the head of a grounded opponent, or if not, legalizing all of those knees and soccer kicks. At least making the 3-point position, so where you have a hand down. Or you have one knee down, at least making it so that knees there are legal. Because I think that would eliminate a lot of stalling against the cage. It would eliminate a lot of kind of questionable calls. Yeah. And there are a lot of refs who already kind of officiate it so that the guys who do that are not kept safe by what somebody like John McCarthy would see as gaming the system. But I would like to see that be made an official thing. So you're standing by the fence. You put one hand down, you can still get kneed in the face. Or you come up to one, or you're getting up from the ground. You have one knee on the ground, and you're in the process of getting up. The other guy can still knee you in the face. I think that it would add a lot to transitions and scrambles if you had an additional threat in there. I think it would broaden the technical repertoires. It would change some of the things that you could do. It would make sprawling out in the center of the cage a much more dangerous kind of position to be in. It would add a lot to guys like Luke Rockhold. Think about how much more dangerous he would be if you could knee somebody on the ground in the head. So that's the big one I'd like to see. I don't know. I don't have any problem with the 10-point must system. I think any scoring system, there are going to be problems with it. Nobody's ever going to be happy all the time.
People with nostalgia for the Pride system must really have overlooked all of the horrible decisions we got in Pride.
Terrible decisions.
A lot of really bad decisions. Remember Decision Dan? It wasn't a complimentary nickname. There were a lot of bad calls. The ninja fight that he had, Ninja Hua, horrible decision. There were a lot of those in the Pride days. Not something I want back. I think it allows too much subjectivity to the way the fights are scored. The 10-point must, it creates a limited window for subjectivity, scoring round by round. I think it's great. I think maybe you can just elucidate how those rounds are to be scored, which I think they have done recently. We've seen more 10-8s. Hopefully we'll even see more 10-10s, because people seem to be really afraid of those. And I have no problem when I see a 10-10 crop up on a scorecard. I agree with the knees on the ground. I don't think I would like to see those awful pile driver knees to a completely grounded opponent in Turtle.
Yeah, probably not.
Those are pretty vicious to watch. I think maybe just changing the rule to, instead of the 3 points rule, just say if they have both hands on the ground, you can't knee them. Because putting both hands on the ground is a significantly more disadvantageous position than having one hand and a partial underhook or something like that.
Yeah.
Or a single leg or something. People will use this as a stalling position, and they'll touch the ground with one hand while they're working back to their feet and working for an underhook. So they can basically game the rules. If both hands are on the ground, then yeah, you could use that to avoid being kneed, but you're also giving up your back and preventing yourself from standing up easily without getting hit. In order to stand up, you need the underhook. Once that second hand comes off the mat, I say you should be kneed or whatever while you're coming up. I think that's fine.
Yeah. Yep. I'm right there. I'm right there with that.
Anything else?
Well, the only judge that I would like to, like as far as, judges or refs that I would like to not see, the only ref or judge that I would not want to see is Douglas Crosby, because even though he's a smart guy, he's totally insane, first and foremost, and his reasoning for why he judges fights the way that he does has absolutely nothing to do with the rules as they're written. Like, we at least all need to be on the same page there.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's even leaving aside whatever problem he has with Ray Longo and Ray Longo's fighters. Like, I'm sorry, but Douglas Crosby should probably not be judging fights in MMA.
Tony Weeks turns in some surprisingly weird cards, too, for a guy with so much combat sports experience. Because as a referee, he's very well known in the world of boxing, and he judges a lot of UFC events. Often turns in some weird scorecards. I wouldn't like to see him gone, but, it's tough. It's subjective. As long as there's nothing that reeks obviously of corruption, it's hard for me to complain too much. Where like the favorite guy wins, or the guy who's a gigantic underdog loses to the guy who doesn't have much to lose by losing. Those kind of things where it's like, okay, something's off here. You're going to get some weird calls. It's just part of the sport. I think it's kind of like knowing your judges is kind of like knowing what surface you're going to be playing on in tennis. Yeah. It's something you can't always control, and it really changes, but it's kind of part of the fun. It's part of the spice that affects each of the fights and makes them all different.
So I thought I would look this up on MMA Decisions. Some of Tony Weeks' more bizarre cards. He scored Pendred Howard for Pendred.
Yeah.
He scored Tim Means versus Marcio Alexandre for Marcio Alexandre, which is pretty unforgivable.
Yeah.
He was the lone judge to score Arlovsky Schaub for Schaub, actually.
I don't think that's a bad card, actually.
No, I'm with that. I think that. Oh, but he scored Koichi Kunamoto versus Richard Walsh. I think was one of the robberies of 2014. He scored that for Koichi Kunamoto. That is a terrible card.
Yeah, what's going on, Tony?
There's some bad ones in here.
What's the deal? He's well known as being a pretty good ref too in boxing. So I don't know what the deal is there. I'm not really. I guess they're different skill sets. Anyway, we'll move on to our next question. This one comes to us courtesy of Teddy Bricker. And Teddy wants to know what our take on Johnny Hendricks versus Wonderboy Stephen Thompson is, and the welterweight division in general. He says it seems like people are sleeping on Hendricks way too much since the weight cut debacle. You could easily argue that he hasn't lost since the Rick Story fight, which you could. He beat Lawler, Condit, Brown. So his question is, do we think Hendricks with a proper weight cut is the best welterweight in the UFC?
Do I think he's the best welterweight in the UFC? I don't know if I think he's the best welterweight in the UFC, but I think that the question here is absolutely correct, and that people are sleeping on Johnny Hendricks.
Yeah, well, there were
totally sleeping on it.
Can you imagine how many people were confidently picking Tyron Woodley over him in their fight? A fight that I thought, man, just the improvements that Hendricks has made to his striking. I rewatched the second Lawler fight not long ago. Yes, he gassed. He had a bad weight cut. It's a consistent and worrying problem for him. But, man, when he was on, his striking in that fight was amazing. It was so worlds better than it was when he first came to the UFC, even than it was in the Carlos Condit and GSP fights, when he was still just kind of a varied version of the lots of left hands. he looked like a brilliant kickboxer in that bout. And then in the Matt Brown fight, his wrestling looked more effective than ever. He really mixed it well with his punching combinations. Seemed to be getting in shape. You know what the saddest thing is? Johnny Hendricks seemed to have finally found his discipline, and I think his body fought back from all the years of not being disciplined beforehand. So he tried to make a positive change, looked like he was in phenomenal shape, both in the Brown fight and heading into the Woodley fight, and his body failed him. And I don't think that's really reason to discount the guy, because we saw how amazing he was just as a natural athlete without taking care of his body. Johnny Hendricks, who's actually trying his best to take care of his body and seems to be doing things the right way and just gets a bad break, I can't really see the logic in counting that guy out against anybody in the top 5 of this division.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll discuss this more as we get closer to the fight. But I think he rolls through Stephen Thompson. Mm-hmm. I really do. I think one of the things that stands out the most about Johnny Hendricks, how good his striking has become, how well coached he is as a striker. Like, this is, his striking coach is friend of the show, Stephen Wright, who is my pick for the most underrated striking coach in MMA. Compare the difference between how Cody Pfister looked against James Muntasiri and how he looked against Yosdenis Cedeno. This is not a thing that anybody is really going to look at in any depth, but compare those two guys. That's what Stephen Wright did with Cody Pfister in 4 months. Mm-hmm. Think about how much better he was. That is an insane improvement to be making for that guy. That's how good Stephen is as a coach, and Johnny is proof positive of that. The output that he gets, the leg kicks, the combinations that he puts together, his rhythm, his timing, his ability to kickbox at distance despite being a short guy. Those are special things for Hendricks to have in his pocket, and people are absolutely underselling him. I think he probably beats Carlos Condit again, certainly in a 3-round fight. I think that he would be competitive with Robbie Lawler. I think he beats the version of Robbie Lawler who abandoned his jab against Carlos Condit last night, on Saturday night.
I just realized how much I want to see him fight Rory McDonald.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, that's a fight I have so many questions, and I can't count either man out there. I think Johnny Hendricks has a really solid shot in that fight.
Yeah, he's absolutely being undersold. I comfortably picked him against Tyron Woodley and would pick him again if that matchup were announced tomorrow. Yeah. Hendricks is a really good fighter. He deserves the credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Ruben and Teddy, for your questions. We really appreciate it. Sorry if we've had some delay on some questions, but again, when you guys get your pledges in on patreon.com, send us your questions in a message on Patreon as quickly as you can. We are eager to answer them and to repay you guys for all of your help and support. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Before we head out, let's go ahead and plug all of our special features this week. Pat, what do you have coming out?
Well, so I just came out with a technical recap of UFC 195, some of the salient things we saw in Lawler Condit, Larkin Tumanov, and Poirier Duffy. And then I think my second piece this week is going to be kind of an essay on the issue that Conor McGregor's coach John Kavanagh raised on Twitter last week, where he got real mad about people talking about MMA as violence.
Because it's not violent, Pat. Jesus, it's a sport. It's not violent.
Yeah, look, his reasoning seems to go something like this, that violence is inherently bad, combat sports are good, therefore combat sports are not violence. And, that kind of misses some of the really interesting things that you can say about the relationship between combat sports and violence and whether violence is indeed inherently bad. So I'm going to be exploring some of those things in a little essay I'll be putting up on Bleacher Report in the next couple of days. What are you doing this week, Connor?
That sounds great. Well, I've got a 2-part pivotal moments breakdown of the title fight between Lawler and Condit. Real challenge there because I got to come up with a pivotal moment of some kind for round 3. So we'll see how that ends up. But basically, I'll be going through the big momentum swings of this fight because all great fights are defined by their momentum swings, and there were a lot of them in this one. And then I'm hoping to do a long-form retrospective on Lawler McDonald before the month of January is up. A nice formatted thing from the fancy designers up in charge at Vox SB Nation. And then throughout the next few weeks, I'm going to try to be running a series of basically retrospectives for the best of 2015, technique breakdowns for all of the best. So basically going through the best of awards that we selected on Heavy Hands and the ones that I picked at the very least, and breaking them down at like maybe 2 or 3 examples per article, and maybe a couple of individual features. So like Ioana and Jacek, best striker, Ben Henderson, best comeback fighter. Somebody mentioned Damian Maia too. I think he definitely deserves an honorable mention as the best comeback fighter. Alistair Overeem, guys like that, and all of these really big moments that defined the last year. So look out for one of those either this week or next week. And we hope you enjoyed today's show, everybody. We were happy to have you with us. Please stop arguing about UFC 195. Let's celebrate how awesome it was. It was a weird card, but man, it ended better than just about any other card in history. As Pat pointed out before, we've got to be happy with the fight that we saw because we don't see many like it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Once again, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.